December 2014. A cold wind whipped around the deserted roads of the Alton Industrial Park in Illinois. Officer Mark Ellison's flashlight beam swept across the abandoned garage, cutting through the thick layer of dust on the cracked concrete floor. "Command, I need forensics here now. Looks like we've found something." His voice echoed in the empty space, mingling with the howl of the wind through the rusted window frame. What started as a routine check, triggered only by a strange odor from the old storage unit, had now turned into something else entirely. When the forensics team broke the lock and opened the trunk of the dusty silver Dodge Stratus, the suffocating smell of decomposition overwhelmed them. Inside was a severely decomposed male body, still dressed in the work uniform of a mechanical shop in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Beside him was a faded name tag, R. Cordero. That name had been in missing persons files for over 2 years. The 52-year-old man who vanished without a trace after his night shift, leaving behind his phone, wallet, and an untouched dinner on the table. For 2 years, Fort Wayne had plastered his photo everywhere: bus stations, gas pumps, supermarkets. But every lead led to a dead end. The press called it Indiana's unanswered missing persons case. The search ended with a brief note: cause undetermined, suspected voluntary departure from the area. Now the silver car in the old storage unit had broken that silence. Investigators quickly realized they were facing more than just a body. It was the key to retoming a case they thought had gone cold. The cuts on the electrical wire, the strange motor oil stains in the trunk, and the storage rental contract under the alias Luis Navarro, all were pieces of a hidden mystery. They didn't know that from that very wire, micro-DNA technology would awaken a justice buried for 12 years, and the story that began in that cold storage unit would lead them across 2 states, across a national border, to confront an unexpected culprit. A man who once worked side by side with Rafael Cordero, shook his hand, then made him a victim of his own silence. This is not just a solved missing persons case, it is a testament to the power of science, memory, and the belief that justice, however delayed, always finds its way back. Before we delve into this shocking true story, tell us where you are watching from, and if you love journeys to find forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. In Fort Wayne, the late-season cold wind blew through the old factory blocks, carrying the familiar smell of metal and engine oil. At the mechanical shop where he worked, Rafael Cordero lingered after everyone had left. He carefully packed his tools, turned off the fluorescent lights one by one, and stepped out into the parking lot. The silver Dodge Stratus was parked alone beneath a lamppost, its weak light reflecting on the dull gray metal. Rafael opened the door, started the engine, letting the sound of the motor blend with the wind blowing through the trees, then left the industrial park, his car's silhouette dissolving into the thick gray fog. His family's small house was lit as always. His wife sat by the window, her eyes on the empty street, waiting to hear the familiar sound of the car, but only the wind howled outside. The phone was called many times, ringing long before being hung up. The children contacted their father's colleagues, his old friends. Everyone shook their heads, no one knew where he was. The atmosphere in the house slowed, becoming heavier with every passing minute. Silence mixed with questions uttered, and then left hanging in midair. The whole family divided the search. The eldest son drove along the route his father usually took to work, the streetlights illuminating the cold, damp road surface. The gas station down the street was still open, but the night attendant said he hadn't seen a car like that pass by. They continued to drive through familiar curves, past quiet residential areas, silently glancing at every parking lot, every dark space between houses. Nothing unusual, and no trace at all. When they returned, the small house felt different. On the table, the half-finished cup of coffee remained, the morning paper still folded, his jacket hanging behind the door. Everything was in place, as if he had only stepped out for a moment, but time kept ticking, and no one heard the car stop outside. No one spoke what they were thinking, but a hint of fear flickered in everyone's eyes. A thick silence spread throughout the room, broken only by the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. The sense of unease had crossed the line from worry. They looked at each other. No one needed to say another word. The family decided to go to the police station to report him missing. Beside her, the eldest son supported her, his face tense, his eyes red from a sleepless night. The early morning watchroom was still empty, with only the white light shining down on the desk, reflecting on a thick pile of files. The duty officer looked up, his voice low and calm as he asked a series of short questions. Name, age, build, last known attire, vehicle. Raphael's name, 52 years old, strong build, salt and pepper hair, and the silver Dodge Stratus were meticulously recorded in the report. The wife spoke slowly, her voice trembling, trying to remember every detail. He left the shop after his shift, had never been away from home overnight, and had no reason to go anywhere without telling them. When she paused, the officer simply nodded, stamping the confirmation. "We'll start immediately," he said, his voice reassuring. Outside, a fine mist of rain fell like smoke, the red light of the patrol car reflecting on the wet road, making the atmosphere even heavy. That morning, the first 2 police officers were dispatched to the small house on Jefferson Street. They stepped across the dew-wet porch into the room, which was so tidy it felt sterile. On the table, the cold coffee cup remained. The jacket Raphael usually wore was still hanging behind the door. His wallet and phone were on the wooden shelf, untouched. No signs of a struggle, no displaced item. One of the investigators quickly wrote in his notebook, "Did not leave home as planned, no luggage, no signs of forced entry." They checked the backyard, only wet grass and a few faint footprints from the family the night before. The garage was empty, old tire marks faint on the cement floor. The missing silver Stratus was the first and only clue. From there, the initial hypothesis was formed. Raphael left work, drove home along his familiar route, and vanished midway. But along that short stretch of road, there was no accident, no witnesses, and no cameras recorded anything. At the mechanical shop where he worked, colleagues confirmed Raphael clocked out late, the last person to leave the shop that night. One worker vaguely recalled him stopping at the gate, as if waiting for someone, then driving off. The shop's camera data was unclear due to the thick fog, showing only the faint light of a car moving south. Police established a detailed route, from the shop gate, through the Maplewood residential area, along Industrial Route 9, then turning onto Jefferson. Each segment of the road was marked with a red pin on the map spread across the investigation room table. The distance is just over 7 miles. It's impossible to lose a person and a car over such a short stretch, the lead detective said, his voice tinged with frustration. An alert for the missing person was issued that same day. Raphael's photo, a gentle smile and squinted eyes behind glasses, appeared on flyers and bulletin boards across Fort Wayne. The local radio also broadcast an appeal for assistance, including a clear description and license plate number of the silver Dodge Stratus. A few calls came in but were all fruitless, mostly mistakes or rumors. At the police station, officers took turns reviewing traffic data and area cameras. Every video segment was blurred by fog and light reflections. No license plate, no face. Just a faint silver streak flashing by and disappearing. They expanded the search to the suburbs, drove along highways, truck stops, abandoned lots, and small bridges. Every night, the list of places to check grew longer, but the result remained zero. The city police chief requested additional support. A team specializing in missing persons was dispatched, coordinating with the highway patrol. They brought in GPS equipment, metal detectors, and even drones to scan the sparsely wooded areas near the Momi River. But the more they expanded, the more their hope dwindled. In the small house, the wife sat by the phone all day, her ear always strained for the ring that might sound at any moment. She heard the news that police were searching along the river. Her heart trembled slightly, but she clung to the idea that her husband had simply had car trouble somewhere, that he would come back. He just couldn't contact them yet. The house remained lit every night, the door still ajar so he could step in at any time. 3 days passed with no results. The flyers were faded by the rain. In the investigation room, the air was thick with fatigue. On the board, the red pins remained motionless, a reminder that the man had left on an ordinary road in a not-too-large city, then completely vanished. From this point, Raphael Cordero's disappearance was officially listed as a Level 1 urgent search, opening an investigation that no one suspected would last for many years to come. Immediately after the file was upgraded to an urgent search, the investigation team implemented the first step, reconstructing Raphael Cordero's entire travel route on the night of his disappearance. The city map covered the meeting table, red pins marking the familiar stopping points, from the mechanical shop in the north to the small street where his house nestled beneath old maple trees. The distance was just over 7 miles, a stretch of road he had driven hundreds of times, but which now became the biggest question mark in the case. Officers were assigned to collect images from traffic cameras, gas stations and stores along the route. Every hard drive was brought back. Every video clip played over and over in the closed room, lit only by the blue glow of the screens. They watched slowly, frame by frame, rewinding, zooming in, then meticulously noting every movement of the silver cars that passed by. The atmosphere was thick with exhaustion, broken only by the sound of pins scratching on paper and sighs mingled with the static hum of the machine. Finally, from a camera at a tire repair shop on Industrial Route 9, they spotted a suspicious detail. In the fog-blurred frame, a silver car slid past, its headlights casting long beams on the wet road. The body style, the decal placement, and the reflective section of the mirror all matched Raphael's Dodge Stratus. The image was grainy, the license plate unclear, but it was the first clue after hours of fruitless searching. The technical team traced the car's direction, scrutinizing adjacent cameras. At the Maplewood intersection, a second image appeared, just a faint silver streak, but the angle showed the car continuing straight south, toward the outskirts. There was no stop at a gas station, no other vehicle traveling with it, and no sign of a turn. It seemed the car was intentionally and silently driving straight out of the city. When investigators arrived at the scene, they found it was a narrow, desolate stretch of road, flanked by abandoned fields and old warehouses. Street lights were sparse, and rusted signs tilted in the wind. They shined flashlights onto the road, examining every tire track, every mud stain, but found nothing unusual. No skid marks, no broken glass. One of the officers quietly commented, "If he had an accident here, all traces are gone." But the hypothesis of an accident was unconvincing. Raphael's route ended exactly where the last camera recorded it. After that, the car and driver seemed to vanish from the map. No toll booth, no other surveillance system picked up a signal. All digital data stopped at the edge of the city, where the electric light gradually yielded to the darkness of the old industrial zone. Another team approached the gas stations around the area. One attendant vaguely remembered seeing a silver car stop nearby and then leave without getting gas. The driver, he recalled, looked tired, wearing a dark jacket, head down, not saying anything, but there was no receipt, no camera recording, and the memory was just a fleeting glimpse among hundreds of customers each night. In the summary report, the lead detective wrote briefly, "Vehicle left the industrial park, through Maplewood, heading south outskirts, vanished from all surveillance systems." That cold conclusion silenced everyone. They had the route, the images, the data, but it all led to an empty endpoint. When the investigation team left the scene, the cold wind blew across the abandoned field, carrying the rustling sound of dry corn stalks in the night. A distant headlight briefly illuminated the gray sky, then disappeared. In that moment, everyone understood Raphael Cordero had not just gone missing. He seemed to have been completely swallowed up by the very city he belonged to. The search for Raphael Cordero gradually retreated from the front pages of local news, leaving only a few short lines in the missing persons, whereabouts unknown section. His family still clung to the faint hope that the car might have been stolen, that he was merely stranded somewhere, and would one day return. But year after year, every clue stopped exactly where the silver Dodge Stratus had vanished from the camera system, until one damp morning in the city of Alton, Illinois, over 300 miles southwest of Fort Wayne, an unusual call was sent to the local police department. The caller was the owner of an old warehouse complex on the banks of the Mississippi River, where rows of garages had been vacant for months. He said that for the past few days, one of the garages had emitted a heavy stench, like a dead animal. He initially intended to check himself, but the smell became increasingly unbearable, forcing him to notify authorities. 2 patrol officers were dispatched. As they opened the rusty iron door with a long screeching sound, the pungent odor rushed straight out, a mixture of mold, rubber, and something sickeningly sweet and ghastly. Inside, under a thick layer of dust, was a silver Dodge Stratus covered in cobwebs and dry leaves. One of the officers covered his mouth and stepped closer. The dusty license plate was wiped clean with a sleeve. The numbers that appeared matched the registration of Raphael Cordero, who had been missing for over a year. The information was immediately reported to the Alton Police Department, then transferred federally to Fort Wayne. A forensic team was immediately sent to the scene. The car doors were locked, the windows covered with a hazy film of dust, but there were no signs of forced entry. In the dark warehouse, a flashlight beam swept across the vehicle's body, reflecting a pale blue light on the faded silver paint. A torn decal fragment on the right door, exactly where it had been noted in the Fort Wayne missing person file. There was no doubt, this was the car the entire city had once searched for. Investigators wearing gloves opened the driver's door. No one was in the cabin, only the strong musty smell of rotten leather and fabric. The vehicle registration, insurance papers and an old pair of glasses lay on the passenger seat. All confirmed the owner's name, Rafael Cordero. But the biggest question remained unanswered. What was in the trunk? A long silence ensued as they prepared to open the trunk. The air in the garage was heavy. The light from the portable lamp shone down on the blotchy gray concrete wall. The officer in charge of the scene took a deep breath and inserted the key into the lock. The dry click of the latch echoed, and the trunk lid was lifted. A foul, thick gas poured out, forcing everyone to step back a few paces. Inside, amidst pieces of nylon and an old blanket, was a severely decomposed body. The face was disfigured, the clothes matted, revealing only a pair of worn leather shoes still tied. A metal-chipped employee ID card peeked out from under the mud-caked fabric, the logo of the machine shop where Raphael used to work. No further confirmation was needed. Everyone understood they were facing what his family had feared the most. The warehouse complex was immediately sealed off. Investigators erected barricades around the area, sealed the garage door, and took air samples for examination. Local police coordinated with the Illinois State Forensic Team to record every detail: ambient temperature, vehicle position, lock status, VIN, engine number, and evidence inside the car. A technical specialist stood silently by the door for a long time, noting, vehicle locked from the outside, no signs of prying. There is a possibility the body was placed in the trunk, and the car was abandoned. When the news reached Fort Wayne, the detectives who had handled Raphael's case could hardly believe it. A cold missing person case was suddenly revived after more than a year by a gruesome discovery in another state. A small team was immediately dispatched to Illinois to assist with identification. The Alton Medical Examiner's office moved the vehicle to the forensic center. In a closed room, the car was placed on a lift. Its entire surface was photographed and sampled. Under a microscope, they discovered old liquid stains on the trunk floor, and a few fibers stuck to the lid hinge. The identification process lasted many hours. The body was transferred to the Madison County Hospital for preliminary examination. Despite severe decomposition, identifying characteristics such as teeth, jawbone and a scar on the right wrist helped doctors determine with near certainty the victim was Rafael Cordero. When the news was reported back to Fort Wayne, a young officer remained silent for a long time before saying, "We found him, but not the way we wanted." That brief statement seemed to close the protracted period of hope and open a completely new chapter, the chapter of a murder case. Outside the warehouse in Alton, the yellow police tape still flapped in the wind. The owner of the warehouse, the first to discover the strange smell, stood watching from a distance, his face distraught. He quietly told a local reporter that he had rented that row of garages a few years ago. The tenant paid in cash, used the fake name Luis Navarro, and disappeared after a few months. That detail was immediately recorded in the file. As the silver car was towed out of the complex, evening mist settled in. Police lights reflected glintingly on the scratched body of the car. Residents of the area stood in silence, no one speaking. They saw only an old car being taken away, but for those involved, it was the evidence that opened a new investigation, where all questions about Rafael Cordero's death would finally begin to be answered. In the cold room of the Madison County Forensic Center, fluorescent lights shone down on the bright cold stainless steel, reflecting dimly on the white sheet covering the body, just transferred from Alton. The air was heavy with the smell of chemicals and metal. Technicians moved carefully around the autopsy table. Each instrument was placed neatly, rhythmically, like in a ceremony. On the headboard chart, the line "Unknown Male," found inside vehicle, Alt, was crossed out and replaced with the newly confirmed name, Rafael Cordero, 52, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Identification could not be made visually because the body was too severely decomposed. It took many hours of comparison for the forensic team to identify him, using the dental records provided by the family. The points of match on the right molar, especially the silver filling on tooth number 24, a small detail, but enough to confirm the identity. When the results were printed out, the chief forensic pathologist merely nodded. No one said anything further. The room was silent, save for the sound of a pen, confirming the official record, positive identification, Rafael Cordero. The next step was the autopsy. The body was cleaned, and samples were taken separately. Forensic doctors recorded the body's condition. The clothes were largely decomposed, but still bore traces of a dark shirt and work trousers, the typical shop uniform. There was a slight fracture on the C3 vertebra in the neck, not enough to cause death independently, but combined with the condition of the soft tissues in the neck area, it suggested the possibility of compression or strangulation. The lungs contained no water, ruling out drowning. There were no major injuries from collision or traffic accidents. The preliminary forensic conclusion: the cause of death was likely mechanical asphyxiation, possibly manual strangulation, or by a soft object. Signs in the tissues suggested the time of death coincided closely with the night Rafael disappeared. There were no signs of the body being moved long after that, meaning he may have been murdered shortly after leaving the shop and placed in the car trunk. The criminal investigation team simultaneously collected samples from the silver Dodge Stratus. Inside the vehicle cabin, investigators wearing protective gear took small samples: fibers, hair, fingerprints, motor oil and dried liquid stains stuck in the corner of the trunk. On the car floor, they discovered a streak of dark viscous substance, smelling similar to industrial oil, likely stained from the clothes of someone who worked in a shop. A half-empty bottle of maintenance oil was found under the driver's seat, uncapped, but it could not be determined who left it there. Specialists noted another detail: a short piece of cut electrical wire under the mat in the trunk. This wire fragment was the same type as the electrical wire for a workbench at the shop where Rafael worked. Although inconclusive, the possibility that the killer was familiar with a mechanical environment was mentioned in the preliminary report. As the initial examination results were compiled, a picture gradually emerged. Rafael did not have an accident. He was intentionally murdered. The way the body was hidden, the car locked from the outside, and the vehicle moved out of state, indicated a plan. The perpetrator not only intended to take his life, but also to completely erase the evidence. DNA samples were sent to the Illinois State Laboratory and the Federal Analysis Center. Technicians collected fingerprints from the steering wheel, gearshift, door handles and the trunk release button. Most were smudged by time, but a few impressions were deep in the layer of oily dust. Under the blue light of ultraviolet lamps, they faintly appeared, sufficient for sampling and comparison. When the autopsy concluded, the body was returned to the storage room. A young employee stood still before the newly affixed nameplate: Cordero, Rafael. He said softly, "At least he's been found now." That simple sentence echoed in the cold space, like a belated farewell. The preliminary report was sent to Fort Wayne the following morning. On it, the conclusion was brief: death determined to be non-natural. Signs indicate violent behavior. Time of death closely aligns with the date of disappearance. DNA samples and physical traces are currently under analysis. With that concluding line, the Rafael Cordero case officially transitioned from a missing person case of unknown cause to a federal homicide investigation. And for the first time in over a year, the Fort Wayne investigative team had a certainty, not just evidence, but the affirmation: Rafael did not willingly leave his life. Someone made him disappear. After the autopsy results were confirmed, the Rafael Cordero case officially became a federal homicide. But just as the hope for a new investigative direction sparked, everything plunged back into a labyrinth with no exit. The crime scene in Alton was too poor. The silver Dodge Stratus was almost entirely wiped clean. No blood, no footprints, no strange belongings. In the storage unit, a thick layer of dust covered everything, erasing all traces. The murder weapon was not found. Fingerprints on the exterior of the car were mostly smudged or distorted by time. Even the DNA samples collected from the trunk were insufficient to create a complete profile. A cold note in the forensic report: no viable identifying data. The only witness was the warehouse owner. the old man who reported the stench. He testified that the tenant used the name Luis Navarro, paid in cash, had no ID, and no phone number. He appeared a few times initially, then disappeared, leaving a newly replaced padlock on the door. The contract was only a handwritten piece of paper with a scribbled signature, no photocopy of an ID. The only surviving information was a vague description: middle-aged man, dark complexion, spoke with a slight Spanish accent. Alton police checked rental storage records in the area, but no name matched. Almost all surrounding cameras were broken. The area was deserted, the streetlights dim, and no one saw when the car was brought in. They could only conclude, someone brought the car, locked it, and disappeared. Fort Wayne was invited to cooperate. The two states shared information, compared road data, but every connection between where Raphael disappeared and where the car was found was broken. No camera recorded the car crossing the state border. No toll booth had a matching license plate. It seemed both the person and the car were erased from the map overnight. Detectives returned to the machine shop, questioning Raphael's colleagues. Everyone said he was gentle, quiet, had no grudges, and no. Police checked bank accounts, calls, correspondence, no signs that he was planning to leave or was in trouble with anyone. An officer noted in the report, no personal motive, no clear enemies. In the following weeks, samples continued to be sent to the Illinois State Laboratory. The results remained the same. The motor oil collected in the car matched the industrial oil used at the shop, but was not distinct enough to trace the source. The fabric fibers on the trunk hinge were common type, sold widely in thousands of stores. Nothing could definitively link a suspect to the crime scene. The joint meeting between the two states quickly reached a standstill. Illinois believed the crime occurred in Indiana, as there were no physical signs in the storage unit. Fort Wayne countered that the perpetrator might be from Illinois, choosing this location to hide the car. Both hypotheses were plausible, but no evidence supported either one. The case stalled, gradually drifting out of media interest. One night, in the office lit only by a desk lamp, the Fort Wayne chief detective reviewed the file. Dozens of photos of the car, reports, examination results, all revolved around a series of unanswered hypotheses. He sighed, writing the final line in the summary report: no weapon, no witnesses, insufficient data to identify a suspect. File transitioned to cold case status. When the paper was stamped and clipped, the Raphael Cordero case was officially categorized as unresolved. A missing person case turned into a homicide, then buried by time and silence. And in that dusty file cabinet, only one clue remained unresolved: the name Luis Navarro, the person who rented the storage unit for the car, and who might have been the last person to see Raphael Cordero alive. After both states officially acknowledged the deadlock, Raphael Cordero's case was transferred to the Madison County Cold Case Unit, which stored hundreds of unsolved cases from the American Midwest. The case file, over 200 pages thick, filled with crime scene photos, transcripts, and forensic reports, was placed in the third drawer of the gray metal cabinet, labeled FWOIL2 Thagwin. The brief note on the cover simply read, "Cordero, Raphael pending DNA technology." From here the case officially entered a dormant state. No full-time investigator was assigned. There was only one periodic review each year when new technology emerged, or when a similar case surfaced. Inside the storage facility, the physical evidence was meticulously sealed: the oil-stained work shirt, fiber samples from the trunk, a short electrical cord, and the nylon fabric wrapping the body. All were stored in specialized, sealed, numbered paper bags, awaiting the day they could be re-examined with more advanced technology. In Fort Wayne, the Cordero family's small house remained the same as the day he vanished. His wife, Elena, maintained the habit of writing to the investigative agencies every year, not to rush them, but merely to remind them that Raphael once existed. She sent photos of their son, wrote a few lines updating them on their lives, and always concluded with one sentence: "Please keep my husband's file alive." Those letters were kept by the officers in the case file, an unofficial but impactful part of the record. In the early years, local media occasionally mentioned the case. On every anniversary of his disappearance, the Fort Wayne Chronicle would run a small segment appealing for information. But as new leads dried up, attention faded. Newer crime stories and hotter takes dominated the headline. Rafael Cordero's name only appeared in the cold cases of Indiana list, the line item ranked behind dozens of others. However, for some, the case was never truly cold. The former Fort Wayne investigator Lieutenant Harold Baines still kept a copy of the file in his desk drawer. Whenever new forensic technology was announced, he would email the cold case unit, suggesting they retest the samples. "Don't discard it," he would say. "The smallest thing can tell the truth." Initially, those words only received polite replies. "We've noted it, we will consider it when funding is available." Throughout the 2015-2021 period, the cold case unit operated primarily on limited funding. They had to prioritize cases with clear DNA, or those with suspects in the National CODIS database. Rafael's case was too ambiguous: insufficient DNA samples, faint fingerprints, no witnesses. The case was therefore always relegated to the bottom of the list. Nevertheless, what led technicians to retain all the physical evidence was the way it had been preserved. Initially, the samples were placed in plastic bags, but upon transfer to the cold case unit, they were switched to specialized, breathable paper bags. This inadvertently prevented the DNA from becoming moldy and degrading, a seemingly small detail that later became the deciding factor. Concurrently, part of the investigation data was digitized. Hundreds of pages of documents, photos and transcripts were scanned and saved in the Madison County internal system. The simple dry annotations conveyed a sense of persistent pain. 2017, no usable DNA detected. 2019, family continues to send letters requesting update. 2020, awaiting funding approval for touch DNA technology testing. Outside the storage room, life moved on. Fort Wayne opened a new freeway. The factory where Rafael once worked was sold to a logistics company. The old building was demolished, leaving only a patchy cement foundation. But for his family, time seemed to stop on the day his car disappeared. The eldest son recalled, "Every time there's a strange call, my mother still thinks it might be the police. She never changed her phone number, just afraid they wouldn't find her when needed." In 2020, when the pandemic slowed down most law enforcement activities, the cold case unit continued to maintain the evidence. A new technician named Catherine Long was assigned to re-inventory all the old DNA samples. She found the bags containing the electrical cord and work shirt from Rafael's case still sealed, unusually dry and clean for the age of the evidence. In her inspection report, she noted, "Sample preservation condition is good, with potential for retesting using touch DNA method." That small note did not immediately attract attention, but it was saved in the electronic file marked with a blue code, indicating samples with future technological potential. 3 years later, this very sentence would become the beginning of the case's biggest turning point. At the time, the Rafael Cordero file still lay dormant in the storage cabinet, stacked among hundreds of others. The external label was faded, the corner of the cover creased from moisture, but everything inside was preserved, as if someone was waiting for the right moment to open it again. A case that seemed dead was merely breathing slowly, waiting for technology and human perseverance to awaken it. In early 2022, while the Madison County Cold Case Unit was re-reviewing the old database in preparation for the periodic assessment, a small but unexpected discovery brought the Rafael Cordero case back into the light. It all started when the investigator in charge of archival records, Catherine Long, who had inventoried the evidence in 2020, was tasked with digitizing all the paper files of backlog cases. Amidst thousands of pages of transcripts, she found a thin old folder with yellowed edges, hand-titled, "Lease Agreement, Storage Unit 1024, Luis Navarro." The folder had almost been lost among the case's financial documents, unnoticed for nearly 8 years. Catherine flipped it open and noticed something unusual. The lease agreement for the garage, where Rafael's Dodge Stratus was found, was signed in black ink. The handwriting slanted, strong and flowing, unlike the scrawled script of most people using alias. Below the signature Luis Navarro was a small, handwritten note, a crossed-out phone number, and a temporary address in East St. Louis, a detail never mentioned in the original file. She photocopied the document and sent it in an email to her superior, Lieutenant Harold Baines, the former Fort Wayne detective now serving as a consultant for the cold case unit. Just 1 day later, he personally came to the archives office. Upon seeing the paper, Baines immediately recognized the familiar script, not because he had seen it in the case, but because years earlier, he had questioned someone with a similar signature style. Silvio Mendez, Rafael's former colleague, at the auto shop. Mendez had appeared in the initial investigation file, considered a potential witness, because he was present at the shop the night Rafael disappeared. However, at the time he had a clear alibi, and was ruled out as a suspect. But after leaving the shop, Silvio suddenly moved away from Fort Wayne, leaving no forwarding address. In the old file, Mendez had signed a statement providing information. That signature was now pulled out for comparison. Baines requested the Illinois State Handwriting Analysis Department to examine the two samples. They used digital penmanship recognition software and expert visual comparison. The results sent a chill through the team. The similarity exceeded 87%, far surpassing the threshold for confirmation in typical impersonation cases. The final flourish, the pressure, the angle of the letter S in Silvio and L in Luis, all matched, as if written by the same hand. When the report was printed, Catherine Long carefully placed copies of the two signatures side by side. Under the white light, the faded black ink was still clear enough to reveal the truth. Luis Navarro was Silvio Mendez, the man who had been eliminated as a suspect nearly 10 years prior. This discovery was quickly presented to the Cold Case Unit commander. An emergency meeting was called, lasting until evening. Investigators reviewed the entirety of Silvio's statement in the 2013 file. He claimed to have left the shop earlier than Rafael, returning to his wife's home in the eastern suburbs. A neighbor confirmed seeing his car in the driveway that night. But upon re-examination, the witnesses confirmed time did not perfectly align. They only heard the car. They did not directly see the person. Another detail also began to take on significance. The type of industrial oil found in Rafael's trunk matched the type used at the shop where both men worked. At the time, due to lack of evidence, police dismissed the theory of Mendez's involvement. But now, with the name Luis Navarro linked to the storage unit in Alton, where the car was hidden, everything suddenly fit together like the final pieces of a puzzle. Illinois police collaborated with Fort Wayne to reopen the Mendez file. They tracked his tax records, insurance, and bank accounts. Most stopped in 2014, coinciding with the discovery of Rafael's body. After that there were no traces. His name vanished from all civilian systems. In 2016, a person using the name Luis Navarro, registered as a freight driver in Texas, with a social security number matching Mendez's last 3 digits. This trace was enough to reopen a federal search warrant. In the small office of the Cold Case Unit, the atmosphere was tense. They pinned Mendez's photo on the whiteboard, next to a map connecting Fort Wayne, Alton, Texas with a red string. In the center of the room, Catherine placed the original storage lease agreement in a plastic evidence bag. "We have the fake identity, the location, and the time marker," she said. "Now we just need to prove a direct link between him and the car." A team of technicians was assigned to re-examine the old DNA samples from the car. Although the samples were too weak before, the new low-level touch DNA analysis technology, deployed in late 2020, they planned to re-scan the piece of electrical cord and the trunk handle for any remaining epithelial cells. While awaiting the results, the Cold Case Unit sent a request to the U.S. Marshals Service to verify the identity of Luis Navarro. The Bureau responded that an individual using that name had applied for a Mexican passport in 2015 in Laredo, Texas, then left for Guadalajara. The passport photo almost perfectly matched Mendez's photo in the Fort Wayne file: a long face, pointed chin, and deep wrinkles around the mouth. After nearly 8 years of silence, Silvio Mendez, the man who had vanished from the police radar, reappeared, carrying the alias Luis Navarro, the very name listed on the lease agreement for the storage unit where Rafael's body was found. When Lieutenant Baines placed the two papers side by side, one the faded lease agreement, the other the new passport photo, he sighed softly. "He never left this case," he said. "It just took us too long to look in the right place." The room fell silent. Everyone understood that the hide-and-seek game was over, and from that old contract paper, a case that was thought to be ashes began to flare up again, opening the journey to hunt down the man once named Luis Navarro, now known by his real name, Silvio Mendez. When the alias Luis Navarro was identified as Silvio Mendez, the Cold Case Unit knew they had touched a critical link, but still lacked evidence to prove he was the one who drove Rafael Cordero's silver, Dodge Stratus from Indiana to Illinois. A matching signature was not enough for an arrest warrant. They needed physical evidence, or specific movement traces connecting the two states. Lieutenant Harold Baines decided to open a new line of investigation, financial and fuel trace. He believed that even though Mendez had covered his tracks, the journey of transporting the car would have left fragments in the transaction system. A car can't travel over 300 miles without gas, he said, and the person who hit it must have stopped somewhere to fill the tank. From the federal database, the technical team retrieved a list of all credit card transactions and cash receipts at gas stations, toll booths and convenience stores along the route connecting Fort Wayne, Springfield, Alton in the approximately 3 days after Raphael's disappearance. They knew this was like looking for a needle in a haystack, thousands of vehicle movements, tens of thousands of receipts, but every small detail could be the key. The initial data filtering system yielded nothing remarkable. Most transactions in the area were cash, with no direct way to link them to Silvio. But when Catherine Long manually checked the digital receipts archived from the Midland Oil gas station on the outskirts of Fort Wayne, she recognized a familiar account number sequence, a debit card under the name Maria Alvarez, who was listed as Silvio Mendez's legal wife in the old shop personnel file. This card was swiped at the Midland Oil station around the time just after Raphael was presumed to have left the shop, and the fuel purchased was regular 87, the exact type used by the Dodge Stratus. The transaction was only valued at $26, but it was enough to nearly fill the gas tank. The small text "authorized driver" included in the receipts suggested that the person who swiped the card was authorized to use the vehicle, not the account holder. That meant Silvio might have used his wife's card to avoid revealing his real name. Tracking the data further, the technical team discovered another toll payment at the Illinois River Toll Plaza, paid with cash, but the surveillance camera captured a blurry image of a silver sedan, its style matching Raphael's car. In the next frame, the driver tilted his head while handing money through the window. The image of half his face under the yellow light showed a thin jaw and wrinkles around the mouth, resembling Silvio Mendez. This data was pieced together into a preliminary travel map. The car left Fort Wayne the night Raphael disappeared, stopped to refuel at Midland Oil, then crossed the Illinois River Toll, heading southwest towards Alton. The timeline between the receipts indicated the trip lasted about 6 hours, consistent with the actual distance. Another detail further strengthened the hypothesis. In the technical report from the forensic lab, the investigation team found that the oil stain in Raphael's trunk belonged to Vanguard Engine Maintenance Oil, a brand imported only by the shop where Raphael and Silvio once worked. This product was not sold commercially, only supplied to industrial customers under contract. That meant the person who placed the body and transported the car had direct contact with that type of oil, someone from the shop, or someone with the key to the technical storage room. From there, Baines and Catherine constructed a route simulation to move Raphael's car out of Indiana undetected. The perpetrator must have had the original car key, or known the location of a spare. Police had found the main key in Raphael's jacket pocket, but it was highly likely he had a copy often used at the shop. In the list of people authorized to use the spare key, there were only 3, and Silvio Mendez was one of them. As the facts were put together, the picture gradually became clear. Mendez left the shop the same evening as Raphael. He had a spare key to the Dodge Stratus. The fuel receipt using his wife's card matched the type of gas and the time the car left the city. Toll road images recorded a man with similar characteristics driving a silver car across the state line into Illinois, and that car was found a year later in a rented garage under the alias Luis Navarro. "We're not talking about hypotheses anymore," Catherine said while presenting the summary report. "Everything points in the same direction. Silvio is the only person with the means, the opportunity, and the technical knowledge to move the car without leaving a trace." Baines nodded, requesting to open procedures for a search warrant and to trace Mendez's remaining assets. Financial data from the National Bank showed one final transfer from his account to Mexico exactly when Raphael's car was brought to Alton. The amount was not large, only a few $1,000s, but enough to cover the escape journey. When the travel map was printed, the red strings connecting Fort Wayne to Alton stood out like veins of blood on the white paper. The officers looked at each other, silent. All understood, the Raphael Cordero case was no longer a mystery of who did it, but a question of when will we catch him. One of the younger members of the team whispered, "He thought leaving the city erased the trail, but it turns out, the gas receipt sold him out." From the corner of the room, Baines only responded with a slow nod. After nearly 10 years, the pieces were beginning to fit, and the man with two names, Silvio Mendez or Luis Navarro, finally left a footprint he never anticipated, the footprint of the one who drove the victim's car across state lines on that rainy night years ago. After the vehicle's journey was confirmed, the cold case unit expanded their investigation to the stops around the border area between Indiana and Illinois. They wanted to find out if anyone had seen a man named Luis Navarro or the silver Dodge Stratus appear along that road. Without a doubt, Silvio Mendez had become the central suspect, but to issue an arrest warrant, they needed what every detective understands: live witness testimony or biological evidence. The investigation team split into two groups. One group was responsible for scouring all private storage units and lots within a 20-mile radius of Alton, a city with dozens of old warehouse complexes along the Mississippi River. They knocked on every door, interviewing warehouse owners, security guards, and even short-term laborers. Most only vaguely recalled a man with a slight Spanish accent, who often paid in cash. A few described him wearing a dark jacket, driving an old small truck, sometimes wearing a baseball cap. When asked about his height, most estimated around 5'10", about 1.78, close to the description in Silvio Mendez's HR file in Fort Wayne. Another witness, the caretaker of a warehouse complex on the west side of Alton, added that he had a gravelly, slow voice, and didn't look straight when talking. Catherine Long quickly jotted down in her notebook: tall, gravelly voice, talks little, cash payment, short-term rental. All the descriptions were fragmented, but when pieced together, they formed a sketch that nearly matched Mendez. However, legally, this was not enough. No one had a photo, no one signed a confirmation document, and every statement was based on hazy memory after almost 10 years. The court would not accept it. Baines understood that, but he knew this was the first time there had been such a consistent chain of description. He told the team, "He passed through here, he paid here. We just need one thing that connects him to the scene, just one thing." The second team focused on the state border, where Highway 67 crosses the Mississippi River into Illinois. Investigators canvassed truck stops and convenience stores that catered to long-haul drivers, as these were places people like Mendez often stopped to rest or buy things. They sought out veteran employees, people who had worked there for years and had a good memory for the faces that passed through. At a small rest stop in the Hartford area, a middle-aged woman named Janice Doyle said she had seen a man with a similar build, accompanied by a gray truck, but what she remembered was the strong smell of machine oil emanating from his clothes. He stood quietly at the checkout counter, bought coffee and a pack of cigarettes, spoke in a deep, drawn-out voice, like someone very tired. When shown an old photo of Silvio Mendez, she hesitated for a moment, and then nodded. "It might be him, but I'm not sure." That statement left the team half pleased, half worried. It might be too little, but at least they had a new matching piece. Simultaneously, the technical division continued to exploit all old data sources. One analyst suggested cross-referencing rental records and temporary employment contracts in the suburban Alton area. They discovered that a person using the name Luis Navarro had once registered as a short-term mechanic at a truck repair shop, less than 3 miles from the storage unit where the body was found. The file noted, "Good with electrical, machine oil and lock system." The salary was paid in cash. When the signature sample in the file was compared with the warehouse rental contract, the similarity rate reached over. This was the second time the alias Luis Navarro was directly linked to the same handwriting, and both locations were within the range where Raphael's car was hidden. In the summary meeting, Baines laid out all the images, testimonies and evidence on the table. The red thread connecting Fort Wayne to Alton now looped once more around the state border, covering a series of coincidences: time, location, and identity. He spoke slowly. "Everything points to him, but without a biological sample, we can't touch him yet." Catherine nodded. She knew that more than anyone, the law needs something undeniable, something only science can prove. The oil streaks, fabric fibers and faint fingerprints in the car might hold that key if the technology was sensitive enough to separate the remaining skin cells. She proposed resending all evidence to the Federal Forensics Lab in Dallas, which had just been equipped with the new generation untouched DNA analysis system, capable of isolating biological traces from just a few epithelial cells. While waiting for the results, the investigation team continued to canvass witnesses. They sought out people who had lived near the storage units, drivers, mechanics, bar owners. Some vaguely remembered a man with cold eyes, salt and pepper hair, driving a small red truck. Every description led back to the same image: Silvio Mendez, the quiet man, skillful with his hands, who understood too well how to hide everything with oil, metal and time. By the end of the canvass, over 10 statements were collected, 7 of which mentioned the same characteristic: deep voice, Spanish inflection. All were not strong enough to issue an arrest warrant, but they were enough to convince superiors that the case had gone far beyond the speculation stage. The cold case unit submitted a report to the Madison County Prosecutor's Office, recommending the case be reopened with a specific suspect's identity. When the meeting concluded, Bain stood alone in the room, looking at the black and white photo of Rafael Cordero and his wife. Their smiles faded over the years. He murmured, "We've come very close," but he also knew, only if science found a real trace in that silver car would the case truly move to the next chapter. And in a lab hundreds of miles away, the team of technicians had begun opening the old evidence bags, carefully separating every remaining strand of electrical wire, preparing for a discovery no one expected. The federal laboratory in Dallas is tucked away in a suburban technical area, where cases thought to be dead are often revived by technology. In early 2022, technicians received a package of evidence from the Madison County Cold Case Unit: paper bags containing a work shirt, a cut piece of electrical wire, and a small piece of fabric from the trunk of Rafael Cordero's car. All were perfectly preserved, dry, clean, and not contaminated by moisture. On the sealed bag was a note from 2015, "Wait for suitable DNA analysis technology." Now that technology was ready. The new generation microtrace DNA system, developed after 2016, is capable of separating and amplifying just a few epithelial cells, traces so small they are invisible to the naked eye. The analysis was assigned to the expert team of Dr. Karen Holt, who had participated in many long-running cold DNA case resolutions. Holt opened the file, looked through the old notes and smiled. "We'll see who left their mark in this darkness." The first sample processed was the work shirt. Under the electron microscope they scanned every fiber to look for signs of biological contact. After 3 continuous hours of scanning, the system detected a cluster of micro-skin cells on the collar, an area often in direct contact when the wearer pulls or adjusts the collar with their hand. The cells were separated and entered the DNA amplification process, using the mVARX technique. On the screen, the character sequences gradually appeared, forming a complete genetic profile. The first result matched Rafael Cordero's DNA sample exactly, confirming it was the shirt he wore when he was murdered. The second sample was the electrical wire used to bind the victim's wrist. The outer plastic layer seemed useless, but Holt requested a detailed scan of the copper core, where the sweat or skin of the person who cut and tied it might be stuck. The technicians proceeded to wash the surface, extracting the remaining cells clinging to the metallic twist. After multiple amplifications, they obtained a second DNA sequence, completely different from Rafael's. The system automatically queried the National CODIS database for comparison. Within minutes, the screen displayed a 99.98% match with the genetic profile of Silvio Mendez, who had a DNA sample in the database from an old administrative violation case in Ohio years ago. The technicians looked at each other, silent for a few seconds. Then Holt quietly said, "This is no longer a hypothesis." The results were cross-checked 2 more times, ensuring integrity and eliminating the possibility of cross-contamination. All 3 times led to the same conclusion: Silvio Mendez's DNA was present on the electrical wire used to restrain Rafael. That meant he had direct contact with the evidence at the time of the murder, biological evidence that could not be denied. The next day Holt signed the forensic DNA match report, confirmation, and sent the original to the Madison County Prosecutor's Office. In the accompanying memo, she wrote, "Microtrace DNA analysis from the electrical wire, belonging to file FWIL 2014, yielded a high match with the personal profile of Silvio Mendez. The data meets federal forensic standards and can be used for an arrest warrant." The news reached Lieutenant Baines the same afternoon. When he saw the words "match confirmed," he remained silent for a long time. Everything they had waited for nearly 10 years, a real trace linking Silvio Mendez to the case, had finally appeared, and it came from the very piece of evidence they once considered useless. The cold case unit immediately sent all documents, photos and forensic results to the Illinois State Department of Justice. Chief Prosecutor Marjorie Klein reviewed the file, confirming the evidence met the standard for issuing an arrest warrant under federal law. In the document sent to the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) and the U.S. Marshals Service, she explicitly wrote, "Biological evidence confirms the suspect Silvio Mendez was present at the scene of the physical evidence in the Rafael Cordero case, requesting approval for a federal arrest warrant and simultaneously initiating a search outside the state territory." Baines received the call notifying him from the prosecutor's office just an hour later. On the other end, Klein's voice was resolute. "We haven't. He won't be able to hide anymore." In the room where Rafael Cordero's photo still hung on the wall, Baines gently touched the thick file, his eyes a mix of weariness and relief. "It took us 10 years, he said, "but now, the truth finally speaks." That same evening, the official copy of the federal arrest warrant was issued. The name Silvio Mendez, or Luis Navarro, was transferred to the U.S. Marshals wanted list. From the Dallas laboratory to the Madison County Prosecutor's office, everyone understood that tiny DNA chain extracted from the electrical wire had closed a decade of silence and opened the door to the upcoming cross-border manhunt. Immediately after the DNA results were confirmed, the cold case unit focused all data on rebuilding the profile of Silvio Mendez, a man who was once a faint name on the roster of technical employees at the machine shop where Rafael Cordero worked. Administrative files showed he was born in El Paso, Texas, in 1966, had a minor criminal record for industrial material theft, and then moved to Fort Wayne around the early 2000s. At the shop, Silvio was described as a quiet man, skillful but unpredictable. He often worked overtime, rarely socialized with colleagues, and frequently brought home spare parts for research. A year before Rafael went missing, management discovered he was selling scrap steel on the side. The incident was not serious enough for prosecution, but sufficient for immediate termination. Rafael, who was the night shift supervisor at the time, was the one who signed the internal report confirming the fraudulent behavior. In the 2013 testimony transcripts, Rafael's wife recalled that Silvio didn't say a word when he was fired, just stared at her husband before leaving. "His eyes were cold then," she said. "I didn't think I would ever see him again." After the incident, Mendez left the city, cutting off contact with all colleagues. No one knew where he went until the name Luis Navarro appeared on the storage rental contract in Alton. The investigation team reconstructed the timeline. Final week. Rafael worked. Mendez visited the shop once, saying he wanted to retrieve some personal belongings. Security confirmed he was present for about half an hour, causing no disturbance. Day Rafael disappeared. The two men were recorded by internal cameras standing next to each other in the parking lot, talking briefly, after which Rafael left the shop. A few hours later, Mendez's wife's card was swiped at the Midland Oil gas station, evidence that he was traveling in the same direction as the Dodge Stratus. About half a day later, the Illinois River toll booth receipt and camera images recorded the silver car and a driver with matching features. 1 year later, the car was found in the storage unit rented under the name Luis Navarro. When these milestones were pieced together, the timeline stretched into a complete straight line from the shop in Fort Wayne to the garage in Alton, with no brakes. There was no longer any doubt. The only person who could drive the car had the technical knowledge to unlock it, and knew how to avoid cameras was Mendez. Catherine Long reviewed all the old testimonies and notes. She noticed an overlooked detail. Rafael once mentioned in a safety meeting that someone around the shop is still secretly returning to the raw material warehouse area at night. That report was not followed up on because Rafael subsequently disappeared. Now, looking back, it was highly likely that person was Silvio, who was still trying to find a way back to get the rest of what was left. Mendez's motive was analyzed in 3 directions. Labor dispute. Being reported by Rafael led to job loss and damage to his reputation within the small immigrant community in Fort Wayne. Opportunity. Mendez knew Rafael's work schedule well, knew he often stayed alone on the night shift and held the car keys. Most not worthy. Practical calculation. Rafael was under a contract extension with the company at that time, meaning a bonus payment was imminent. Mendez, unemployed and in debt, might have thought that murder, seizing the car, and fleeing to another state, was the fastest way out. In the investigation report submitted to the prosecutor, Lieutenant Baines concluded, "The profile and timeline show Silvio Mendez had a clear motive, favorable opportunity, and biological trace evidence at the physical evidence. No other possibility is more reasonable." The facts gradually fit together like steel links, from the animosity at the shop, the cross-state journey, to the storage unit where the car was hidden. Every small detail, every line on a receipt, every DNA cell now pointed to one single person, Silvio Mendez, the man who thought he had buried the past under layers of oil, metal and time. When the timeline was printed out and posted on the investigation board, the red line connecting Fort Wayne to Alton was now complete, closing a gap that had lasted 10 years. Baines looked up at the diagram and quietly said, "It all started at the shop and it will end there too." After the file and timeline were finalized, Madison County prosecutors signed the decision to transfer the case to the federal level. The DNA evidence met national standards, the motive was clear, the travel itinerary was consistent, every factor qualified for requesting an international arrest warrant for Silvio Mendez. The name Luis Navarro was now merely a thin cover. For the first time in nearly 10 years, he was officially referred to by his real name in legal documents. The arrest warrant was forwarded to the U.S. Marshals Service, the agency responsible for tracking fugitives who cross border. Lieutenant Baines and Federal Agent Robert Keating were assigned to coordinate the pursuit. The first task was to determine if Mendez was still within U.S. territory. Technical experts traced the fake Social Security number once used to apply for a job at the Alton warehouse. Data showed that after 2015, a record using a nearly identical number sequence was filed for a dock worker position at the Manzanillo Seaport in Colima State, Mexico. The registered name, Luis Navarro, The attached photo in the labor file was blurry, but the facial bone structure and build matched suspiciously well. Keating sent a verification request to Interpol Mexico City. Within 2 weeks the Mexican side responded, this worker's file was currently active in the Guadalajara port logistics area, using a local phone number, and held no valid passport. Cell tower location data showed the SIM card often switched on in the early morning at the worker's boarding house near the port, then turned off in the evening. To further solidify the case, Baines coordinated with the U.S. Department of State, gathering cross-border money transfer data. A chain of small Western Union transactions, sent regularly every month from the Guadalajara area to an old account in Fort Wayne, under the name Marisol Vega, Mendez's ex-girlfriend. The last time that account was active was 3 months ago. He's sticking to his old habits, Baines noted, sending money under an acquaintance name to avoid a trace. Given this chain of coincidences, the Madison County prosecutor officially requested the U.S. Marshals Service to issue an international manhunt and transfer the file through an Interpol red notice. The file bore the reference number 920 FWLTN 222, specifying the charges of murder and concealment of a corpse, U.S. nationality, and the possibility of hiding in Mexico. Interpol quickly responded, placing Mendez on the persons of interest, active pursuit list. The warrant was sent to border crossings, airports, and the Mexican Federal Police Force. The joint task force between the Marshals Service and the Policía Federal Ministerial, PFM, was established, operating covertly under the code name Operation Grey Bolt. The surveillance plan began by tracking the phone signal. The Interpol technical team installed IMSI catcher equipment to harvest frequencies from the suspicious boarding house area. Every time the Luis Navarro phone switched on, the map displayed a small bright dot moving around the port. 1 week, 2 weeks, then the signal abruptly stopped at a seafood market on the outskirts of Guadalajara. Local coordinating agents quickly organized ground surveillance. Through long-range lenses, they saw a man with salt and pepper hair, a thin build, wearing a cloth mask and a baseball cap. An image that matched the twist. He was unloading goods from a truck onto a freezer stall, with a long scar on his left hand, a detail recorded in medical reports from his time in Fort Wayne. When the comparison photo was sent back to the U.S., Baines immediately confirmed, "That's him." The next day, Interpol Mexico approved the arrest plan. At 6 a.m. the combined force surrounded the boarding house on Calle Juarez, where Mendez rented a second-floor room. An agent disguised as a maintenance worker knocked on the door. When he opened it, the task force rushed in. No resistance, no attempt to flee. Mendez simply stood still, his eyes blank as if he had known what awaited him. On the table, police found a fake identity card under the name Luis Navarro Hernandez, along with a few old photos taken with colleagues at the port. No weapons, no drugs, just a few pesos and a cheap cell phone. News of the arrest was forwarded to Madison County the same day. The U.S. Marshals issued an internal communique. Subject Silvio Mendez apprehended, Guadalajara, MX, awaiting extradition process. After 10 years, the man who had vanished from the map of America was finally found, in a damp rented room, nearly 2,000 miles from the crime scene. And in the eyes of the investigators, that long drawn-out pursuit had finally reached its destination. As the Interpol file was being updated, the Operation Grey Bolt Task Force received a tip. The phone signal of Luis Navarro Hernandez had reappeared, this time not in Guadalajara, but at the port of Manzanillo, one of Mexico's largest commercial ports. This was the final stop in his logistical journey, a place where thousands of workers toil every day, making it easy to blend into the crowd and disappear without a trace. The U.S. Marshals, in coordination with the Policía Federal Ministerial, PFM, quickly deployed a surveillance team. They sent an officer disguised as a cargo inspector to infiltrate the loading and unloading area. Mendez was identified as working the morning shift, moving frozen cargo containers. Under the fierce Pacific sun, he wore a reflective vest. A dark cloth mask and an old necklace was visible around his neck, a detail matching the description in the tweet. Just as container number 7B was pulled into the inspection yard, the GPS location signal from the phone perfectly matched Mendez's position. The team leader gave the signal. 2 Mexican federal police pickup trucks blocked both ends of the exit. Agents quickly surrounded the area. One stepped forward and shouted in Spanish, "Policía Federal, alto." Federal police, stop. Mendez started and turned around, his hand still holding a metal hook. But instead of resisting, he dropped the hook and put his hands up. Within seconds, 4 officers rushed forward, slammed him onto the concrete, and cuffed him. The port alarm sounded briefly, then fell silent. A clean arrest, without gunfire, without chaos. During the body search, police recovered a fake passport under the name Luis Navarro Hernandez, issued by the Jalisco State Civil Registry. The photo was blurry, the embossed seal rough, but it was enough for him to pass internal check. In his backpack, apart from a few pesos and an old watch, there was nothing else. When asked his identity, he only whispered, "Luis Navarro." But when the arrest warrant was read to him in English, he bowed his head in silence. No reaction, no justification. News of the arrest was relayed to the U.S. Marshals Service that same afternoon. Immediately, the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City initiated the extradition process under the The Madison County prosecutors submitted all documentation, the DNA report, the identification results, and the extraction of the charges of murder and concealment of a corpse. Within 3 weeks, the diplomatic and legal steps were completed. The Mexican side agreed to hand over the suspect to the United States, on the condition that he would be tried under state law, with the death penalty not applicable. The transfer date was set for Benito Juárez International Airport, Mexico. That morning, Mendez was escorted in an armored vehicle from the temporary jail in Colima to the capital. 2 American agents, Agent Keating and Deputy Marshal Rivera, were waiting on the tarmac. As he stepped out of the vehicle, handcuffed and hooded, Keating merely glanced at him and nodded. The right man. Before boarding the plane, a Mexican consular officer asked a final question. "Do you confirm you will not appeal the extradition order?" Mendez replied hoarsely, "No, I'm tired." The charter flight took off at sunset, taking him back to Illinois. Throughout the journey, he barely spoke, only looking out the window, the late-day sun illuminating a face that had aged more than 10 years. When the plane landed at Abraham Lincoln Capitol Airport, state police and marshals personnel escorted him to the Madison County Jail. The news was briefly reported by local press. Suspect in 2012 Fort Wayne disappearance, extradited from Mexico. Below the black and white photo was the small caption, "Silvio Mendez, 56, held without bail." In the jail, he was placed in a high-security, Isolated unit. Under the surveillance camera, Mendez sat silently on a metal stool, the fluorescent light shining down on his pale face. A police officer wrote in the report, "Subject calm, cooperative, unresponsive." More than 10 years after Rafael Cordero vanished from Fort Wayne, the man who had erased all his tracks was now locked behind cold bars. And for Madison County, that closed circle, from the Alton warehouse to the Manzanillo port, had finally concluded. 3 months after Silvio Mendez was extradited to the United States, the case State of Illinois v. Silvio Mendez was officially entered into the Madison County Circuit Court calendar. That morning, the Illinois sky was overcast, with snow lingering on the courthouse steps. Reporters crowded outside, waiting to capture the image of the man who had been a fugitive for over a decade. When the transport vehicle stopped outside the main entrance, Mendez stepped out, his head bowed, hands cuffed, his gaunt face obscured by the orange prison uniform. In the preliminary hearing, which lasted nearly 2 hours, Chief Prosecutor Marjorie Klein read the indictment covering 2 main charges: concealment of a homicidal death, the act of hiding the victim's body and vehicle at the warehouse in Alton, Illinois. Klein summarized the investigation process, emphasizing 3 key points: the matching DNA test results between Mendez and the evidence, the warehouse rental record, matching his signature, and the complete reconstruction of the Fort Wayne, Alton Manzanillo travel itinerary using financial and location data. "We are no longer talking about suspicion," she stated. "We are talking about a chain of evidence linked like steel rings." The court-appointed defense attorney William Hurst immediately counterattacked. He filed a motion to exclude several DNA samples on the grounds of risk of cross-contamination during nearly 10 years of preservation. Hurst argued that storing the evidence under varying temperature conditions over time could affect the reliability of the microtrace DNA result. Furthermore, he claimed that obtaining the comparison sample from the national database without a specific court order violated the client's personal privacy rights. The prosecution vehemently rebutted. A representative from the Dallas Forensics Lab presented an independent technical report confirming that preservation and analysis procedures adhered to federal standards and had been verified by 2 different laboratories. "The data cannot be fabricated," the expert stated, "because Mr. Mendez's DNA was found inside the electrical cord, a place where only the person who directly handled it would leave a trace." After over an hour of debate, Judge Harriet Dunham issued a temporary ruling. The motion for exclusion was largely denied. The court only agreed to dismiss 1 supplementary DNA sample deemed insufficiently reliable, while all primary evidence, including the DNA sample on the electrical cord and the warehouse rental signature, remained in the prosecution file. "These factors," she said, "meet the standard of probable cause to proceed to trial." At the end of the session, the judge read the decision. The court sets the preliminary trial for September 18, 2023. The defendant shall remain in custody without bail. The prosecution is permitted to summon expert witnesses, including Dr. Karen Holt, microtrace DNA expert, Dr. Alan Bowers, Illinois State forensic pathologist, and Lieutenant James Baines, Fort Wayne lead investigator. Outside the courtroom, the press scrambled to record every moment. As he was escorted through the hallway, Mendez did not look at the cameras, only walking slowly, his hands still cuffed in front of his abdomen. A reporter shouted, "Do you have any regrets?" He did not reply, only turning his head toward the window, where the pale winter light shone through the bars. Meanwhile, the prosecution team worked nonstop to prepare for the main hearing. They compiled all witness testimonies at the state border, the Dallas lab report, and Interpol's confirmation regarding the use of the false identity Luis Navarro. A legal expert described, "We are piecing together the entire picture, not just to prove he committed murder, but to show how meticulously he planned his escape." The nearly 200-page case summary was transferred to courtroom number 3, presided over by Judge Dunham. The court announced that the trial would be public, but with restricted live recording, to ensure objectivity. DNA and forensic experts were summoned as key witnesses. The list included representatives from the U.S. Marshals Service to describe the extradition process. In the Madison County Jail, Mendez continued his silence. He did not contact his lawyer outside the regulated scope, refused to meet reporters, and did not accept letters from family. A jail staff member recounted that he sat for hours by the small window, looking out onto the yard, seemingly still waiting for something he himself could not name. And for those who had followed the case from the beginning, Mendez's appearance in the courtroom after more than 10 years was a sight both chilling and satisfying. After years of the file gathering dust, the name Rafael Cordero finally returned, no longer in the missing persons category, but at the center of a case being brought to light. The upcoming trial, with the DNA, the witnesses and the final words, will decide everything. The trial of State of Illinois versus Silvio Mendez opened in Courtroom 3 of the Madison County Circuit Court, a heavy and tense morning. The public gallery was packed with reporters, residents of Fort Wayne, and the family of the victim Rafael Cordero, who had waited for this moment for over a decade. At the defense table, Silvio Mendez sat upright in the gray suit prepared by his defense attorney, his hands clasped in front of him, his face gaunt, his eyes quiet and expressionless. Chief Prosecutor Marjorie Klein stepped up to the podium. Her voice was steady and resolute. "Your Honor, we will prove that the defendant, Silvio Mendez, not only took Rafael Cordero's life, but also carefully planned to conceal that crime for many years." The large screen behind her lit up, displaying a series of images, the dusty silver Dodge Stratus in a storage unit in Alton, a copy of the storage lease, signed Luis Navarro, and pages of forensic reports bearing the logo of the Dallas Forensic Laboratory. Klein began to present the chain of scientific evidence she called the backbone of the case. First was the micro-DNA evidence. Dr. Karen Holt, a forensic specialist, was called to the witness stand. She detailed the process of extracting and amplifying cellular samples found on the segment of electrical wire used to tie Rafael's hands. That DNA sample, she stated, was preserved in a dry condition, located within the copper core of the wire, ruling out cross-contamination. It perfectly matched Silvio Mendez's biological profile, with a margin of error below .0. Holt calmly replied, "The DNA trace was deep within the metal core, a location where it could only be left during the process of tightening or cutting the wire by hand. In other words, the person who left that trace directly handled the wire." Klein continued by presenting the storage unit lease, signed Luis Navarro. The original was projected on the screen, alongside a genuine signature sample of Mendez collected from his employment records in Fort Wayne. Handwriting expert Stanley Drayton presented the comparison results. An over 92% match in distinctive features, the slanted S, the elongated Z mark, and particularly the habit of lowering the letter M. He concluded, beyond a doubt, the person who signed Luis Navarro is Silvio Mendez. Next, the prosecution presented the financial and fuel trail, a digital map simulating the journey from Fort Wayne to Alton. Based on gas receipts, credit card data, and toll fees, Rafael's Dodge Stratus was confirmed to have traveled through stops exactly along the route Mendez had used while working at the shop. Each stop time coincided with small cash-paid expenses. Klein pointed to the map with a laser pointer. "This is the trail of a person who knew the terrain well, chose the route with the fewest cameras, and knew exactly where an abandoned storage unit was located to hide the car. This was not a coincidence, this was a plan." The final piece of the evidence chain came from the Illinois State Evidence Laboratory. The report showed that the engine oil sample collected from Rafael's car perfectly matched the specialized industrial oil used by the Fort Wayne shop, a compound with a rare additive ratio that only appeared in the batch Mendez was responsible for maintaining, and this result reinforced the hypothesis that Mendez took Rafael's car directly from the shop, then drove away while the victim was incapacitated. Prosecutor Klein summarized means. He possessed technical skill, the ability to bypass the locking system, and understood how to erase traces. Concealment, signing the storage contract under a fake name, hiding the car in Alton, and then fleeing to Mexico. Not a single link in this chain is separate, Klein said, and all of them lead to the same person, the defendant sitting here. At the defense table, Hearst tried to keep his voice calm. He argued that the physical evidence only shows presence, not a direct description of the act of murder. He emphasized the lack of a murder weapon or eyewitnesses. But when Judge Dunham inquired, "Do you have a reasonable explanation for why your client's DNA is on the physical evidence?" Hearst merely replied, "The possibility of contamination in the chain of custody cannot be ruled out." The prosecution side was silent, then Klein spoke slowly. "Your Honor, for 10 years no one has touched that evidence, except certified forensic personnel, and Ms. Mendez, He touched it the day Rafael Cordero disappeared. The courtroom fell silent. In the front row, Rafael's wife bowed her head, clutching a small prayer book. The scratching sound of the court secretary's pen echoed dryly as she recorded the prosecutor's final words of the day. We do not just have DNA. We do not just have a signature. We do not just have receipts. We have the entire story of a person who thought they could erase time. But the truth, like that DNA, is never lost. The judge nodded, declaring a recess for the first day of the trial. The chain of evidence was complete, each piece interlocked like a steel frame, preparing for the closing arguments from both sides in the next session. The trial moved into its 7th day, the atmosphere in the courtroom as taut as a wire. After the prosecution completed its chain of evidence, it was defense attorney William Hurst's turn to present his rebuttal. He walked slowly to the center of the room, adjusted his tie, his voice even but cold. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my client, Mr. Silvio Mendez, is being convicted based on fragments of conjecture, not a single direct piece of evidence regarding the act of murder. Hurst began with his central argument, the lack of direct witnesses. No one saw Mendez and Rafael Cordero leave the shop together. No one witnessed the attack, and no murder weapon was found. He paced back and forth before the podium holding up a thick file. A serious criminal case must be built on irrefutable evidence, but here, all we have is DNA. And that DNA, ladies and gentlemen, could absolutely be the result of secondary transfer, meaning the defendant could have touched the electrical wire at the shop earlier, and it was used later without his knowledge. Prosecutor Marjorie Klein lifted her head, her gaze steady. Hurst continued his attack. He cited the defense's forensic expert, who suggested that micro-DNA can survive for many years on metal materials and does not reflect the time of contact. He concluded his argument with a definitive statement: no witness, no murder weapon, no precise time, and a chain of DNA that could have been moved across thousands of hands. Can we convict a human being based only on this? The courtroom was silent. Then Prosecutor Klein stood up. She carried no thick file, only a brief note on a single sheet of paper. Your Honor, DNA does not lie. And when that DNA is deep inside the core of the electrical wire used to bind the victim's hands, when the signature of that same person appears on the storage lease where the body was hid, when the financial history and travel itinerary match kilometer by kilometer, then it is no longer conjecture. She held up the reliability statistics chart. The probability of a random DNA match with another person was 1 in 5. She then continued, each piece of evidence in this case exists independently, but when placed together, they form an unbreakable chain. DNA, signature, route, engine oil type, even the false identity, all led to Silvio Mendez. No one else. A state forensic expert was called up to confirm that Mendez's DNA sample could not be due to secondary transfer, as it is located in the metal core area, tightly protected and only accessible during the act of tying or tightening. That is not stray DNA left by accident, he said, that is the DNA of the person who acted. When the prosecution concluded its rebuttal, Judge Harriet Dunham requested both sides to cease arguments and handed the case over to the jury. The 12 members were ushered into a private room. Outside no one spoke, only the ticking of the court clock could be heard. After more than 4 hours of deliberation, the door opened. The jury foreman stood up, his voice slightly trembling but resolute. We, the jury, after considering all the evidence, find the defendant Silvio Mendez guilty of the charge of first-degree murder and concealment of a homicidal death. A murmur arose and quickly faded. Mendez sat motionless, eyes downcast at the table, showing no expression. Baines, sitting behind the prosecution, merely closed his eyes slightly, almost not breathing. Judge Dunham read the final sentence. Pursuant to Section 9(1) of the Illinois Criminal Code, the defendant Silvio Mendez is hereby sentenced to 55 years in state prison for the crime of first-degree murder, and 10 years for the act of concealing a homicidal death, to be served consecutively, totaling 65 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for the first. The gavel struck 3 dry blows. A case that lasted over a decade concluded with a sentence everyone knew was deserved, but no one felt relieved. As the bailiffs led him out of the courtroom, Mendez turned his head just once, not towards the prosecutor or the defense attorney, but toward the black and white photo of Rafael Cordero displayed on the evidence board. His gaze was empty, and then he disappeared behind the heavy iron door. The case of Rafael Cordero was officially closed with a harsh sentence, and with the affirmation that the truth, even if buried for many years, would eventually be named. When the verdict was announced, Fort Wayne, the city where Rafael Cordero once lived, seemed to hold its breath. The news spread quickly on the evening broadcasts. Cold Case 2012 finally solved. Silvio Mendez sentenced to 12 years after the night Rafael disappeared. The case was closed, but its echoes still resonated across the two states of Indiana and Illinois. In Fort Wayne, where missing Rafael Cordero posters were once taped to utility poles for years, residents paused longer outside the old mechanic shop. Some brought flowers to place at the gate, quietly, without words, just a small gesture for a silent worker they once knew. The shop's new owner told reporters, "Rafael was a good man. He was just doing his job. No one ever thought something like this could happen here." In Alton, where the silver Dodge Stratus was found in the old storage unit, local authorities erected a small memorial by the Mississippi River, inscribed with the words, "In memory of those who vanished and were found through truth." The ceremony was simple, attended by only a few dozen people: Rafael's family, the investigators, and residents who had followed the case from the beginning. His wife, her hair now speckled with gray, lit a candle and quietly said, "It took us 12 years to find the truth, but at least, it has arrived." For the investigating team, this case was not just a victory, but a turning point for local forensics. Immediately after the trial, the Indiana State Police and Madison County announced a new program named Never Forgotten, a campaign to re-examine all cold case files with preserved biological evidence. Lieutenant James Baines, who tracked the case from day one, stated at the press conference, "We learned that no sample is useless, only that the technology was not yet advanced enough to read them. Rafael Cordero taught us that." Media across the country reported on the role of micro-DNA technology, calling it a historic milestone in reviving dead evidence. The Chicago Tribune ran the headline, "From Dust to DNA, How One Fiber Solved a Decade of Silence." In a special feature, Karen Holt, the forensic specialist from Dallas, emphasized the importance of proper evidence preservation. If that electrical wire had been sealed in a plastic bag, the DNA would have degraded, but it was stored in a paper bag, and that is what saved the entire case, she said. Universities and police academies in Indiana began incorporating the Rafael Cordero case into their curriculum on cold case investigation. Students are shown it as a classic example of persistence, where every small detail, from the scrawled signature on the storage contract to the dust on the wire, can become the key to reopening a closed door. In the Latin American community, where Rafael attended church, a prayer service was held. The priest read the final words, "Justice came late, but it came, and when the truth is spoken, the soul of the lost one can truly rest in peace." In the Madison County Correctional Facility, Mendez was transferred to a long-term confinement unit, far from the media spotlight. His file was marked no parole. Earliest released. There was no longer any escape, no false name to provide cover. When autumn returned that year, Fort Wayne was again covered in a thin mist, just like the night Rafael last left the shop. But this time, the city was no longer silent in doubt. At the gate of the old shop, a small sign was hung, "Justice for Rafael." The case closed, but its impact became a symbol of faith in delayed justice. A disappearance that seemed to have been swallowed by time was finally brought to light thanks to the persistence of people who refused to give up. 12 years passed, and everything changed: technology, people, even investigation methods. Only one thing remained intact: the belief that the truth, no matter how long it is buried, will find its way back. In the story of Rafael Cordero, justice came late, thanks to very ordinary details that someone paid attention to correctly. The electrical wire sealed in a paper bag instead of plastic, helping the micro-DNA remain usable. The Midland oil gas receipts and easy pass toll fees, linking Fort Wayne. The storage lease, signed with the fake name Luis Navarro, and the uninterrupted chain of custody protocol for evidence. From this there are a few useful lessons for life in the United States today. First, families and communities should have personal safety plans, the habit of checking in upon arrival, departure, sharing familiar routes, storing spare keys safely, avoiding keeping them at work as in Rafael's case, creating an opportunity for Sylvia. Second, Workplaces need rigorous risk reporting and asset management procedures, documenting labor disputes, controlling specialized supplies. Engine oil, the oil trace matching the shop, became evidence, and revoking access and keys immediately upon an employee's departure. Third, if a loved one loses contact, report to the police early and provide specific data, phone, gas cards, Easy Pass, etc. Those small digital trails can be the route of life or death. Fourth, the community can help by retaining documents, photos, receipts, and avoiding the spread of speculation. Investigators, won by accuracy, not noise. Fifth, support initiatives like Never Forgotten, budget for labs, micro-DNA technique training, and standards for long-term evidence preservation. That is the reason the electrical wire spoke after 10. Marshall's Interpol, financial data, and science closed the 12-year circle. Justice in America is sometimes slow, but if everyone does their part correctly, preserving evidence, following protocols, reporting promptly, it will come. If you believe that justice can come even if late, as in the case of Rafael Cordero, please hit subscribe to continue our journey, exploring cold cases, solved by time and persistence. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video, where every small clue can change an entire story.